You're watching The World with me, Charles Aniagolu. To Rome now, and cardinals meeting today at the Vatican have decided on a date for the funeral of Pope Francis. It'll take place this Saturday at 10 a.m. local time. The cardinals have also set in motion the political process for the church to select a new leader in the coming weeks. The 88-year-old pontiff died on Monday from a stroke and heart failure. In accordance with his will, Pope Francis will be buried in a simple tomb in the Basilica of Santa Maria Maggiore in Rome, not in the Vatican. It'll bear a one-word inscription, Franciscus, which is the Latin version of his name. The world's 1.4 billion Roman Catholics across the globe have been mourning as they remember his legacy as a champion of the marginalized. Dozens of world leaders are expected to attend the funeral alongside hundreds of thousands of the faithful. President Trump said Pope Francis was a good man. President Lula of Brazil said humanity had lost a voice of respect and welcome for others. The Vatican has published footage of Francis lying in an open coffin dressed in a red robe, with a papal mitre on his head and a rosary draped around his hands, as cardinals and nuns look on and sing prayers. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by Father Emmanuel Ojeifo, who is a priest from the Catholic Archdiocese of Abuja and is currently a PhD student in theology at the University of Notre Dame in the U.S. state of Indiana. Thank you very much indeed, Father, for joining us. And have you come to terms with the death of Francis? Has the news now landed and sunk in that the Pope is no more, or is it still sinking in?
Thank you so much, Charles. It's a pleasure to be on this program. Maybe I should start with an anecdote. So a couple of weeks ago, a priest from Benin Republic who had studied under the Catholic Archdiocese of Abuja in Nigeria called Cardinal John Anaikon to greet him. He's studying in Rome now. And so he called Cardinal John Anaikon, the Archbishop Emeritus of Abuja, to greet him. And the Cardinal asked him, Father Leonce, how are you doing? How is Rome? And Father Leonce responded, I'm fine. Rome is fine. The Pope is sick, and we don't know what's going to happen to him. And Cardinal Anaikon caught in immediately and said, no. Nous savons ce qui va se passer. Meaning, we know what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen to the Pope, but maybe we don't like it. So is the death of Pope Francis a shock? No. Is it a surprise? No. But are we sad? Yes. I am deeply sad. So it's sunk in over the last 2-3 weeks since he got back from the hospital to his residence in the Vatican. I could see his countenance, his body carriage, and you could tell that this was a man who was struggling to keep up with the demands of his office amidst his ill health. So I knew that it wouldn't take too long for the Pope to pass from this world to his eternal homeland. So it's really sad. It's really sad, but it's not a shock. It's not a surprise. This is the path that each one of us will eventually pass, sooner or later.
That's the rather depressing part of it all, isn't it? But what would you say, Father, his biggest impact was on the African continent? I mean, was it to give voice to the plight of the poor, many of whom are in Africa, to draw attention to almost forgotten parts of the continent that are rigged by war, like the DRC, the CAR, Sudan, Madagascar, etc., places he actually went to, some of them quite dangerous, showing sort of his solidarity and that he wasn't just sort of talking abstractly?
Pope Francis, his legacy, his example, what would be his greatest impact on the continent of Africa? I would like to see him as, of course, many people do see him from the global south as the first post-colonial pope that the Catholic Church has had. And in that sense, we can see, as you rightly said, his confrontation with some of the ghastly atrocities happening on the continent of Africa, which of course have their historical roots in the question of colonialism, in extractive capitalism, in a view of Africa as a place where nothing good can come out from, which shapes how the big nations of the world relate with Africa, with the land, with the people, but also with the resources. So Pope Francis was a man who had Africa very dear to his heart. And we can see that from the number of visits that he made. He came to the office quite old. He was 76, 77 years old when he was elected. But in the 12 years of his papacy, he came to the African continent 3 times and visited 8 countries. And we can see the depth of engagement that he had in the different countries that he visited. In 2015, he went to Kenya, he went to Uganda, and he went to the Central African Republic. In Central African Republic, he went into the Central Mosque in Bangui, where he was speaking to Muslims and talking to them about how to overcome hatred, work for peace, promote interreligious dialogue. He had this very impressive meeting with the Imam there in the Central Mosque in Bangui. In 2019, he came back to Africa, went to Mozambique, went to Madagascar and Mauritius. In 2022, he planned a trip to the Democratic Republic of Congo and to South Sudan, but due to ill health, he was advised by his doctors not to go on that trip in July. But the Pope still went the extra mile. He asked the Vatican Secretary of State to visit these countries in that same month that he was supposed to visit, and the trip was rescheduled. So in February of 2023, Pope Francis showed up in DR Congo and in South Sudan. So we can see a Pope who really was in touch with the reality of what's happening on the ground in Africa. And we could see, even when he came to Africa, how he would put aside his scripted text and speak to people from his heart, because he was really in touch with what was happening on the ground. So here's a Pope who had Africa very dear to his heart in terms of his engagement with the continent, but we also see it in terms of, the work of evangelization that he carried out in Africa, whether it is with creating new dioceses across the continent, or whether it is with appointing new bishops, or, this promoting also the sensitiveness that the Catholic Church can speak not just with the voice of the shepherds, of bishops and priests, but that the voices of the lay people really does matter. So this idea of synodality, that we are a church that is not just made up of clergy and religious, but that the lay people are the majority of the church. They have the highest number, and that for us to really be a church that embodies the values of Jesus Christ, we have to listen to people at the margins. So this idea of synodality, and he's appointed women from Africa into important Vatican commissions. He's appointed lay people. Pope Francis's engagement with Africa is multifarious in many dimensions. He was a Pope who really had the poor, those who are excluded, those at the margins of society, very dear to his heart. And he made sure that he preached what he called the joy of the gospel to Africa. But also he was deeply infected in a positive sense by the visits he made to Africa. I remember, and this is where I will end this, I remember where a presenter from Radio Kenya was asking him after his first visit to Africa on the flight back to Rome, the in-flight interview, this reporter asked him, what was the most memorable moment of your trip? And he was saying, God surprises us, but Africa surprises us too. He says, look at the crowds, the great crowds of people, the hospitality, the joy of the African people. This was something he took from African continent.
Well, we appreciate your getting into all of that. If I could just ask you to, if you don't mind, just keep your answers a bit shorter than that so we can get to a couple more things. Very interesting listening to you, though. And I mean, you were saying there that he had this connection, which I've heard a lot of other people say, with the poor and the marginalized and so on. But in the face of all that, we forget that he is, in fact, a head of state at the Vatican and also the leader of 1.4 billion Roman Catholics around the world. And we've already got various world leaders saying they'll attend the funeral, including President Trump, President Macron, President Lula of Brazil, and a host of others. So clearly, I mean, this funeral, in spite of the fact that he wanted something low-key, is going to be a world event.
Yes, of course. And that's because he's been to many countries in Europe, in North America, in South America, across Africa. And so many people really connected with the message of the Pope, with his leadership style, with his pastoral priorities, with the issues that he brought to the global stage. And so if we see so many world leaders deciding to attend the funeral, that's welcome, even though the Pope, before he died, he wrote his spiritual testament where he said he wanted a very simple funeral. He doesn't want anything that is big and complicated. And he wrote down very clearly what manner of funeral he wanted given to him. Yeah.
So, I mean, let's tap into your sort of knowledge of these things that some of us may not be that familiar with. I mean, we're now essentially in a period of transition between popes, aren't we? What is known as sede vacante, or vacant seat, which is the period of transition. So essentially, the church is now waiting for that position to be filled because there is no vice pope or anything like that, is there?
Correct. You are correct. So the administrative structure of the Catholic Church at the highest level of the governance of the Universal Church has the Pope, who is the spiritual head. But in the event of the retirement or the death of a Pope, the Catholic Church, the organizational structure goes into what you rightly call the sede vacante, a vacant chair. The chair of the Pope is vacant. And that devolves the responsibility of the temporal governance of the Universal Church to a figure that is called the Camerlengo of the Holy See. So the Camerlengo of the Holy See steps in as a temporary administrator of the Church in the period where the seat of the Pope is vacant. So it is the office of the Camerlengo that confirms the death of the Pope. It's confirmed in the chapel. So that has been done, and the Pope has been placed in the casket, as you rightly showed in the footage that you displayed. So that has been done, and by tomorrow, the remains of the Pope will be brought to St. Peter's Square, where people will be able to view the remains of the Pope on the church is under the care of the Camerlengo, but the Camerlengo doesn't work on his own. He works with the College of Cardinals. So earlier today, there was a general congregation. The Dean of the College of Cardinals, who is the most senior head of this college of church leaders who elect a pope, or who also advise the Pope, has written a letter to all the cardinals all over the world, especially those who are voting members in a conclave, to say you now have to start coming to Rome. So there was a general meeting of the cardinals this morning. There's going to be another one in the evening, and to continue for the remaining days leading up to the burial of the Pope. And after the burial, the cardinals will go into the conclave to elect a new Pope.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that assessment from you, and obviously you've got the inside track, which we don't, so we appreciate it very much. Father Emmanuel Ojeifo is a priest from the Catholic Archdiocese of Abuja. He's currently a PhD student in theology at the University of Notre Dame in the US state of Indiana, and he was talking to me on the line there from London. Thank you very much indeed, Father.